I'm not really one to rant on this platform. I don't typically care for the dramas and the controversies, but every so often I'll come across something that really grinds my gears and that I feel compelled to address. And today it is this article from The Telegraph called Why Gen Z is Too Dumb to Read Wuthering Heights, written by Liam Kelly. The second I saw this headline, my blood pressure spiked because it's the exact kind of snobbish, sanctimonious bullshit that should have no place in literary discussion. It helps no one and only exacerbates the problem the author claims to care about. If you're alive in this year of our Lord 2026 and even mildly aware of pop culture, then you know that a film called Wuthering Heights was just released. One starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi, and directed by Emerald Fennell, who also directed 2023's Saltburn. I say a film called Wuthering Heights and not an adaptation of Wuthering Heights because Fennell freely admitted that her film isn't really a direct adaptation of Emily Bronte's classic Victorian novel. Rather, the film is inspired by what she wanted the book to be. In an interview with Fandango, she says, "The thing for me is you can't adapt a book as dense and complicated and difficult as this book. I can't say I'm making Wuthering Heights. It's not possible. What I can say is I'm making a version of it." Fennell further explained that her Wuthering Heights movie is inspired by a version she remembered reading as a 14-year-old that isn't quite real. A version where I wanted stuff to happen that never happened in the story. So she said it is Wuthering Heights, but it isn't. By the time you're watching this, the film will have been out for about 2 weeks or so, and it seems that every single person who has seen it has a strong opinion. Now, I have not seen the film, and I don't intend to. Frankly, if a film inspires such a headline as "Masturbation on the Moors for the win," I know that I'm not the target audience for that. I don't need to see that. And I'm ashamed to admit I have not read the novel. Ooh, deeply embarrassing for a self-described literary lady. I know. I'm just not really drawn to the Victorians, but I will get to it eventually, promise. Luckily for me, this video isn't really about Wuthering Heights, but rather the fact that the movie has inspired tens of thousands of primarily young people to read the book for the first time. In the UK, sales of Wuthering Heights have risen 469% in the last year, according to publisher Penguin, and bookshops have sold 5 times the number of copies last month, at 10,670, as they did last January, at 1,875. That is insane. But is it good enough for the internet? Of course not. But real quick, if you're new around here, hello, I'm Joe, and this is Thought Couture, where sensitive souls like yourself can build or rebuild a thoughtful and creative life. Here I make videos on self-education, literary and cultural commentary, and personal reflections on the realities of being an aspiring writer in the digital age. If that resonates with you, do consider hitting that subscribe button. I would love to have you stick around. I also have a Substack newsletter where I have more extensive personal essays, where you can access more educational resources, and where I post my favorite creative writing exercises, and that will be linked down below. The problems arose when these Bronte-curious young readers took to TikTok and said, "Well, shit, this book is hard."
When he grew up, he started working with his father, but later he left and began traveling around the USA. He was greatly impressed by the scenes of the working slaves and he worked as a postman.
I need someone to tell me I'm not alone in this, okay? But I recently read Wuthering Heights, and I felt like the dumbest person while reading this. And this is coming from someone that used to read classic literature for fun. I've been primarily reading like romance, fantasy, thrillers, all the genres except for classic literature. And I was like, I'm gonna go back to it because the movie comes out. I literally was sitting there like, am I really this stupid, or is this a really hard book to read? And I need someone to tell me I'm not alone in this. Please and thank you.
Enter Mr. Liam Kelly for The Telegraph and his article, Why Gen Z is Too Dumb to Read Wuthering Heights. Hey, I forgot to mention, in fairness, the Author of any article in any publication is not necessarily the same person who chooses the headline. This could have been the work of a different editor. I simply don't know. Regardless, I still think it's a gross choice, and we're going to get into that. So I thought I'd look at a few quotes from the article and then respond to them, and then we'll look at two different articles that basically argue against Kelly's assertions, because I find them kind of egregious. Many of the books have been bought by young people eager to understand the story of Kathy and Heathcliff before Emerald Fennell's big screen version hits cinemas on Friday. But if stories circulating online are to be believed, many of these newly bought novels are being left largely unread. Social media is awash with Gen Z readers who claim to love literature but lament that they find Wuthering Heights, a book regularly taught at GCSE and A level, that's AP English for my fellow Americans, too difficult. I was just struck by this judgmental tone. Oh, this book is taught in high school, therefore, if you're above the age of 18, it shouldn't be a problem for you. It's a false equivalency. High school assignment equals easy. And that's just not necessarily true. Case in point, I was first assigned Homer's Iliad in high school, and I did not finish it. I did not get it. It wasn't until 10 years and a master's degree later that the epic finally clicked for me. Let's see, trigonometry is taught in high school. If you made me solve a triangle right now, I'd probably cry. Also, notice the wording. Gen Z readers who claim to love literature, not readers who love literature. Implying that loving literature and finding it difficult are mutually exclusive. As if to say, well, if you're struggling with a book, you must not really love reading. And that's just ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. In fact, I'd argue that true book lovers understand that literature, and classics especially, can be and are hard. But they also understand that that doesn't make them impossible, and it doesn't make you, the reader, stupid. Reading, and again classics in particular, exposes us to archaic language, unfamiliar concepts, and cultural contexts that are often wildly different from our own. In this case, Wuthering Heights was written in 1847 and includes a Yorkshire dialect spelled out phonetically. Anyone who says, oh, so easy to understand, either speaks in a Yorkshire dialect or is lying. Speaking of. But how hard is it to get through Wuthering Heights, really? My recent reread was largely trouble-free, and not because I am some sort of singular genius. There was the odd word to look up, such as when Heathcliff is described as an arid wilderness of firs and whinstone, or when the narrator says, I had no desire to aggravate his impatience previous to inspecting the penetralium, but Bronte's language is, for the most part, fairly accessible. Of course, Mr. Kelly's reread was just so smooth and easy breezy. Of course. I love that he needs to add a disclaimer that he doesn't think he's some sort of singular genius, which sounds like someone who thinks he's some sort of singular genius would say. That's an unfair characterization. I'm sorry. It got a little riled up. Reread is the key word here. Because, of course, a book is easier to read when you've read it before, when you're already familiar with the language and the story structure. But the Gen Z readers this article references are reading Wuthering Heights for the first time, and we don't know what their backgrounds are. This may well be their first ever Victorian novel, and they may not have an advanced education in English lit. And not to mention, like, not to make it personal, but Kelly is probably 15 to 20 years older than these readers. I'm guessing maybe early 40s, older millennial. I mention this because, yes, you're going to have an easier time reading a difficult book than a 22-year-old if you have 20 extra years of reading experience. Truthfully, I have nothing but respect for the young people in these TikTok videos because it takes a surprising amount of strength to admit, particularly in front of thousands of internet strangers, that something is hard, you're having trouble, and that you need help. That is the first step to learning and growing and improving. And, speaking as someone who went through two literature programs, there is such a stigma in these intellectual spaces around asking for help. It's just so silly and ridiculous. I can remember a few instances where my entire class was having trouble with a text, but in class discussion, no one wanted to admit it until one brave soul raised their hand and asked a question, and then everyone else just like breathed a sigh of relief. Like, oh, thank God someone finally said it. I had professors beg us to come to their office hours and ask questions rather than just blindly fight our way through. The article goes on to state that the reason Gen Z is struggling to read classic books is the prevalence of screens, social media, AI, and the ubiquitous brain rot that is propelling us into a post-literate age. And I'm not arguing with that one bit.
You who seek an end to love, love. You who seek an end to love, love will yield to business. What the fuck is that?
Like so many of us, I am rereading Wuthering Heights before the movie comes out, and it has not taken me long to realize that there's some brain rot happening. This is not the brain that got the English degree, okay? It's actually been kind of a wake-up call for me. I don't think I've read anything other than books that were extremely easily digestible in, it's gotta be like over 6 months. I'm finding this to be much more challenging than I would have a couple years ago.
We close with an open-ended question. But if we really are entering a post-literate age, are people who struggle with a book such as Wuthering Heights capable of deeper, more critical reading? Or are we drifting towards a bleak future in which novels must guide readers by the hand? I didn't notice until just reading that quote back right now of, gosh, just how judgmental and even mean that sounds. If you're struggling with Wuthering Heights, then you're basically brain dead, and you alone are ushering in the end of civilization. Like, if this book is hard, you just must not be capable. Your brain rotted. Sucks to be you. What put me off the most about this specific article is just, what is the point of it? What did it accomplish? The author points out a very real problem, but then makes these sweeping assertions that degrade an entire generation of people based on a few TikTok videos, mind you, and then offers no solutions. Now, of course, I'm not expecting any one person to solve the literacy crisis in the span of a single article, although if someone could, please do. But I am asking for a fair assessment of a serious issue that doesn't only serve to bolster the author's own ego. For example, this article from today discusses the same phenomenon, but does so in a far more balanced way that actually dives into specific text-based reasons why Wuthering Heights is a difficult book. The perceived difficulty of reading grade school classics like Wuthering Heights can also be attributed to a changing English language, not just doom scrolling. I think the way that people write and the way that people talk shifts over time. Other potential challenges include the terminology, the sentence structure, and the density of the prose, plus the incomprehensible Yorkshire dialect. Virginia Rademacher, a professor of literary and cultural studies, also says the difficulty comes down to the narrator. The book has multiple narrators and also unfolds in letters. It's told by these unreliable narrators. We don't actually know if what we're being told about the characters is completely true either, because we can't trust the various people that are telling the story. All of that is to say, there are very real factors that make Wuthering Heights a challenge, and the reader is not at fault for finding those challenges challenging. It may seem I'm going in a little too hard on this one particular article and writer, because I am. But really, that Telegraph piece is indicative of an attitude I come across relatively often in the books, publishing, cultural sphere that is a massive thorn in my side. Negativity and derision, masquerading as concern. I am so tired of people complaining for the sake of complaining and pointing out again very real problems, but then simply pointing fingers and blaming everyone else and blaming the powers that be without critically engaging with, well, what exactly is going on here and what can we do? Because playing the blame game is a hell of a lot easier. And unfortunately, I've come across a fair few classics lovers in particular, both online and off, who really seem to think that anyone who's maybe new to literature, who maybe isn't as experienced or is having a difficult time, or who, God forbid, ever reads genre fiction, is beneath them. And that is no way to spread a love of language. Conversely, this article from Dazed called No, Gen Z Aren't Too Dumb to Read Wuthering Heights, written by Halima Jibril, is a pretty direct response to the Telegraph article. Jabril agrees that attention spans are getting shorter, literacy is declining, and young people are struggling more with dense text than they used to. She also points out that film, TV, and books are being dumbed down to accommodate this, which in turn only makes the problem worse. However, she does not stop there. There is a larger reason why people opt out of reading more challenging novels, watching more difficult films, or doing anything else they perceive as requiring deep, effortful concentration. Modern life leaves so many of us exhausted and unable to find the time for personal pleasures and pursuits. After a hard day of selling our time and bodies, people want to relax and not use their brains. Social media and other forms of easily digestible content facilitate that sense of comfort and recovery, demanding nothing from us other than our time. Obviously, we need to fight the fact that social media wants to turn us into passive, inactive zombies, but to do that, we need to recognize why we are so susceptible in the first place. See, now was that really so hard? Beautifully stated, and I agree. Social media use is the symptom, not the cause. There are people who are being paid tons and tons and tons of money to design apps and devices that keep you as hooked as possible. They will use every single one of your pain points against you for their own benefit. And speaking of pain points, the world is a scary place right now in pretty much every way imaginable. And because of social media and the internet, we are inundated with horrors beyond our comprehension 24/7, 365. So I'm filming this just 5-ish days after there were 2 mass shootings in the span of a week, first in Canada and then in the US. 2 in a week. Is that a record? That might be a record. And yeah, I watched a lot of cat videos last week because the evil of those tragedies is ineffable. And I felt sick to my stomach for several days on end. And cats are cute. And who knows what next week has in store? It'll be something. I know that. Whether on an individual, personal level or a societal level, until we understand exactly why we're drawn to these forces that deplete our thinking skills and attention spans, we cannot make progress towards the world we want to see. I just mentioned those mass atrocities, and I hesitate to use them to illustrate my point, but there is an apt parallel. Your access to such weapons facilitates the violence. Yes, absolutely. But that doesn't address the core reason why people are wanting to enact such violence. And in my opinion, there is a severe mental health crisis at the core of all of that that few people even know how to talk about, never mind treat. In both cases, the plant is going to keep growing if you don't dig up the seed. That's the metaphor that's coming to mind. I hope it worked. Ultimately, I don't know what to do about almost any of this, but I do know that if we want to encourage people, particularly young people, to grow outside of their comfort zones, we need to help them believe that they are capable of doing so. The very best teachers and professors that I've ever known were the ones who insisted that no matter how difficult the subject was or what sort of struggles students were having, that the students were always, always smart enough to learn. They did not give up on anyone. And what they absolutely did not do is say, well, guess there's no hope for you, kid. You're an idiot and you're making the world worse. For anyone of any generation who's struggling to read a difficult book, whether that's Wuthering Heights or something else entirely, let me just say, you can do this, you do have the skills, you can figure it out, even if it does take more time and energy than you expected. Great books are challenging for legitimate reasons, and that's in part why they have stood the test of time, and why they are so rewarding. Struggling with them does not make you inherently stupid. But thinking another reader is inherently stupid for struggling does make you an asshole. Well, that is it for me today. Rant over. Thank you for staying with me till the end. I'd love to know if you have any thoughts on any of the perspectives I've shared today. Do you think Gen Z is dumb? Have you seen Wuthering Heights? Is it trash? Have you read the novel? Did you struggle? If you agree that calling people idiots is no way to get them to read more, give this video a little like. That is the easiest and fastest way to help support the channel. Thank you so very much for spending your time with me today. If you enjoyed this video, log off and read a book. But if you're really in the mood for another, then you might enjoy these. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.